Item of business is adoption of the agenda. Look over that and make a motion when you're ready.
Cole, make a motion to accept or to adopt the agenda.
Okay, all in favor, Cole,
Yes.
Mike,
Yes.
Terry,
Yes.
Derek?
They need to say their names when they
Oh,
vote.
They do.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
Okay,
Cole? Yes. Mike? Yes. Terry? Yes.
Ian, yes.
Okay.
Derek, yes.
okay, number 3, public comment.
Nobody signed up, Gary?
Nobody signed up.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Tower, nobody signed up.
Number 4, order of business. 4A, manager review of the June 29th, 2020 regular meeting and part of history review.
Okay. If council will turn to their packet, the presentation, we're gonna start on slide 2. Should read June 29th, meeting review, public comment review. So one of the things I wanted to do, we had a lot of people who could not here at the last meeting, so I wanted to review some things. We also had a couple of things that happened that probably shouldn't happen at meetings. So we're gonna review a few of the issues, kind of get rid of some of the misconceptions. So again, first we're gonna start with public comment period. So anytime council public comment should be at a regular meeting. That's number 1. Number 2, council can designate speakers. So if we have 3, 4, 200 people who want to speak on the same issue, we can designate a group speaker. Same thing for if we're at legal capacity for town hall. Number 4, speakers must address the council as a whole. I don't think we had any issues with that last month. Council and staff do not answer any questions during the public comment. Again, this is it's not a two-way street. Number 6 and 7, we don't debates between council and the public. Each speaker, they must sign up at the beginning of the meeting, and then they have a max of 3 minutes to speak. He is presenting. A couple things they can't do, they cannot use profanity at all. And even though no council members were mentioned in particular by name, we did have a few of you mentioned by action during the public comment. So that also cannot be done. They must address the council as a whole, and again, they must be courteous. Last thing, applause must be held until the end. Okay, moving on. Next thing is sales tax monies. We had a few.
Logan, Derek said he couldn't hear too well, so I don't know if you can, you're speaking in a microphone, right?
Is it better?
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds much better. We had some misconceptions on how that's both levied and collected and spent. So I put in here 5 questions that just kind of goes over an overview of what sales tax monies are. Question 1, what accounts for Hildebrand sales tax? The county levies 4 different ones. One is Article 39. It's a 1 cent tax. We have Article 40, which is a ½ cent. Article 42, which is also a ½ cent. Then we have Article 44, which is roughly a ½ cent, but it varies each year. Question 2, who levies it? Burke County, not Hildebrand. How is representation given for the sales tax and the use of sales tax?
Okay.
So again, how is representation given for sales tax and the use of sales tax? So Burke County citizens and Hildebrand citizens obviously get to vote for the Burke County County Commissioners. And then Hildebrand residents get to vote for the town council. So for the representation portion of this, they get to represent or vote for the county commissioners on the levying of sales tax. And then they get to vote for the Hildebrand Town Council for how that money is spent. How are sales tax money distributed is question 4. So Burke County distributes via the ad valorem method. There are 2 methods. We're not going to worry about the other one because it's not relevant. Tax dollars are divided up based on the government's property tax dollars as a percentage of all property tax dollars collected in Burke. For example, if there's $100 in total, this is not realistic, but just for an example, if there's $100 total collected as all property taxes in all Burke County, and Hildebrand levies 10 of it, we would get 10% of every sales tax dollar collected anywhere in Burke County. Whether that's Hildebrand, Morganton, Drexel, Valdez, it doesn't matter. It's all gonna be Hildebrand to the same percentage regardless of where it's spent, okay, if that makes sense. So then question 5, does Hildebrand only get sales tax dollars, sales tax paid in Hildebrand? No, again, so anytime sales tax is collected, it's based on that percentage of our property tax dollars as a portion of all property tax dollars collected in Burke. Now, moving on to the next. June 29th meeting review fund balance. So we had a few citizens comment on fund balance. This is as of our audit done 6/30/2019 with $2,683,000. However, $380,000 of that was unavailable in stabilization, economic development, and future expenses. That left us with a total of $2,300,000 available to spend. Right now, we have estimated projects that we've looked at a total of $834,500, which would leave us in 3 to 5 years with roughly $1.5 million. However, then you get down to the 8% requirement by the state that you must always keep. The LGC recommendation of keeping no less than 25%. And then last month, we voted to keep our fund balance at least 75% for the foreseeable future, which would cut us down to roughly $750,000 available to spend. So next page, future town projects. So obviously we had a group that wanted us to pursue a project without outside money. So what I wanted to do is show council, if we took that approach with every project in town, how much that would cost. So we have 10 projects right now, projects or programs in our budget. If you look at all these, I won't go down each individual one. All of them, but 2 or 3 have outside funding that we're anticipating. But for the same 10 projects, if we did not get outside money or grant money, we would be looking at spending about $2.7 million on the current 10 projects we've got listed. However, if we go after this with grants and volunteer donations, we're only looking at spending $834,000. So that's a $1.9 million swing if we go after grants versus if we don't, if we take that approach versus not taking that approach. So I wanted to show the importance of any time there is outside funds available, we should at least try for them, because that's going to be your ultimate impact right at $2 million, which is also right at how much we have in the fund balance. So we couldn't even afford to do this list of projects if we did not see grants and outside. Also, we had some comments that maybe we weren't doing any projects or having projects lined up. So I obviously wanted to show these 10, but I also wanted to mention that we're looking at replacing auditorium seats. This is at the very bottom. We've looked at downtown Wi-Fi, but we put that off for now just because of the yearly cost. Then we've also submitted 2 projects to DOT, a roundabout at Main Avenue and South Center Street, and then a sidewalk and widening of Wilson Road. Both of those are going to take 3 to 5 years, and currently DOT has pushed most of their projects back, so there's no real legitimate timetable we can look at. But again, those are 14 projects we're looking at right now. Those are going to take 2 years to come to fruition. So it may look as though the town's not doing something for the next 1.5 to 2 years, but that's just because the town has not put anything in the pipeline over the last 3 to 5 years. If they had, we would have certain things popping up each year that we're doing. So moving to the next one. Now we're going to look at committees. I think a lot of the council was under the impression that the group that presented to us at the last meeting were an official town committee. Now, while they can be a committee, they're not a town committee. And the reason I want to make that distinct is because of some of the things they wanted to do that's not part of what a committee does. So we have a committee policy that outlines all of this, but I wanted to make it clear. Committee roles and responsibilities. So any committee that's formed, council, we initiate it. The council initiates. Council also, when they form a committee, when you all form a committee, you will do so with a very explicit purpose. You will task them with an individual responsibility for either a project or a plan they're reviewing. The entire council will select all the committee members after an application and selection process. Any committee meeting that meets, they must do so, it must be advertised and open to the public. They must also submit an agenda and have minutes just the same as the council does. They would need to get that to our town clerk at least a week ahead of time. So again, we can do the same exact process we do with council with the committee. They must also have a quorum. So if they've got 9 members, they gotta have at least 5 there. If they've got 7, they gotta have at least 4. Lastly, this is really all a committee does. At the very bottom of roles and responsibilities. They have three aspects. One, they review a plan or a project that's assigned by you all, by the council. Then when they get that project or plan, they got 2 main functions. Identify any concerns they have with the project, things they don't like, or any opportunities they see within that plan or project. And then lastly, they distribute those through recommendations to the council. In other words, anything like asking for funds, asking for engineering drawings, asking to speak with contractors, that's outside of the realm of the committee by a mile. Like if they're doing anything other than reviewing a plan, identifying concerns and opportunities, and then providing a recommendation, they're not doing committee work at that point. Lastly, some of the things we don't want to see a committee do is have them obviously review anything that's not assigned by you all. They're not going to get mileage or get paid. They're not considered town staff. No committee member can be involved in litigation. Otherwise, they do not perform staff or council functions. They can't meet without providing an agenda to the town clerk at least 1 week ahead of time. And then the biggest one is anytime we select a committee member, we want to make sure that enhances the relationship between the town of Hildebrand and the community of Hildebrand. If they're not doing those 2 things, then we probably need to look for a different committee member. Anyway, okay, so moving on now to the part F, I'm going to turn it over to Aaron after this. But I did want to review one other thing that was said at the last meeting. We heard some comments that maybe because we got this grant in 2010 that we're no longer competitive at all. So I provided you with a list of all of the Part F grants received in Burke County by the county board of municipality. There has been a total of 18 accepted in the 26 years of the program. Hildebrand, Drexel, and Rhodhiss, we all got 1 grant, and Rutherford College, but most of those were back in 2010 or 12. Rutherford College got theirs this year in February. But the ones I wanted to show you that they kind of break down the argument that just because you get it once means you're no longer competitive. Valdez has got 3 within the last 5 years. Burke County got 4 within a 4-year period, and they also got 2 within the same year. Then they got 1 as recently as 2018. Morganton has gotten a total of 6 since 1998. They got 5 of those within a 10-year window, 98, 01, 03, 04, and 08. Again, total grants 18, and the average grant amount received was $250,000. That was a lot in a very short amount of time, but do we have any questions? Okay, I'll turn it over to Aaron to talk more about Part F.
Can y'all hear me okay? No, can you hear me through the microphone?
I don't think so.
Okay, is the mask a problem? Can y'all hear? Okay, I'll do my best to enunciate, but if anybody has trouble understanding me, just feel free to interrupt. My name is Erin Cloudy. I work with the Western Piedmont Council of Governments. I'm a community development administrator, which essentially means I do a lot of grant writing. Some of you may know me from my time as a land use planner. I was the planner at Hildebrand for a couple of years. So I've worked for the COG about 5 years now. Can you still hear?
You have to speak right into the microphone.
Okay. So I worked for the COG about 5 years now. Since I started, I have been kind of the recreation go-to person in our organization. So I've done recreation planning for municipalities. Recently did one for the countywide recreation plan, as well as grant funding, worked on grant funding for many projects in this region, including several in Burke County, Rutherford College, Valdez, Drexel. Look forward to hopefully working with Hildebrand too. I just wanted to give you kind of an overview of the process that we usually go through with park planning, and the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund grant application. They go really hand in hand. So if there's an interest in a new park project, just kind of a general understanding in the town that, hey, we need to move our parks forward, maybe we need some renovation, maybe we need additional parks. The first step we usually try to take is, well, the first step is creating a plan. But the first step of that is identifying stakeholders. And those stakeholders go beyond just the city government, the town council, they go beyond specific groups. It's really anybody in the town or who visits the town as a stakeholder. Anybody who might have skin in the game. And so it's important, as since you all are stewards of these public resources, it's important to make sure that any project, any significant capital expenditure is going to effectively serve your residents, not just some of your residents. And so it's really a way to make sure that when we're investing in a property, we're getting the bang for our buck, and making sure that no one is overlooked. So the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund, sometimes I'll shorthand call it PARTF. Well, the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund, though, emphasizes in their application public input is, I would say, the most important piece of the puzzle. But that's not the only reason that we do park planning. So when I say park planning, I'm talking about creating a document that lays out a 10 to 15 year vision for parks in the town of Hildebrand, and or for a specific park in the town of Hildebrand. So that process goes from the town, who actually lives here, surveys and other public involvement meetings, and gather responses about what people want to see, and then making sure that those responses are populous of the town. And then we would take those recommendations, or would take the public input, weigh it against budgetary concerns and logistical concerns, and turn those into recommendations. I like to look at a park plan as kind of a wish list. A lot of funders want to see that your project has been premeditated, that you've thought about it before, and that it fits into a bigger picture. So it's crucial for anything that we actually intend to do in the short term to be included within this plan. And that's not just for parks, that's for anything, especially when you're spending significant resources. You want to ensure that you've done your research on the front end. Also, planning can provide, or having a document in place, it shouldn't just sit on the shelf. It should be there to define your vision. And that vision isn't the vision of an individual, it's the vision of the town as a whole. It's where do our interests overlap and what can we agree on? So it defines that vision, which can help with fundraising efforts, can help with grant applications, but then it also provides a measure of consistency across, as governing boards shift and as staff changes, that everybody knows what the goal is. And it can be revisited and revised in the future, but just kind of have a starting place. So the planning process, typically, when I do a park plan, I typically account, it takes about 6 months, I'll say that, to do an effective public input period and then put the whole plan together. And I could get into some more of the details of that, but I'll let you ask questions when I'm done here. I say 6 months. That's really to create the plan, to create the roadmap. The Part F project, whatever project we want to propose to a funder, should be built entirely upon this public input, this planning process. So I kind of like to see them as two separate things. You do the 6 months essentially, and we can whittle that down a little, but 6 months of planning and creating this thing and then getting it to a finished state where we can agree on it and the council can adopt that guidance document. And then we start the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund application. It has a requirement for several public meetings that are specific to the Part F project, meaning that you would need to have budget numbers and the specific park elements in place. So it's really not feasible to do that kind of outreach until you have the vision defined. So typically I try to start the Part F meetings. Parks and Recreation Trust Fund grants are due usually May 1st. This year was a little bit later. So I try to start the process for the application around January, just to make sure that we have enough time to get all our ducks in a row. Parks and Recreation Trust Fund, I keep talking about, it's the main state grant fund. It's the main fund that that is used for Parks and Recreation in North Carolina. There are several others that are typically used more often for land acquisition and rehab of existing facilities. But for the purpose of this new park on the town property, Part F would probably be your most effective. Parks and Recreation Trust Fund is a 50-50 matching grant, so that means for every dollar they give you, they want to see $1 of local buy-in. That could be city money, that can be private donations. Sometimes they're run through a friends group. There's fundraising done through a friends group. But only the city, local governments and counties are the only eligible applicants. So that would have to be done in partnership and under the leadership of the city, of the town. There is a scoring system in the Part F application, and that brings in elements of, how many public meetings did you hold? How well does this project actually meet the needs? What kind of environmental impacts would it have? So those things fall into the scoring system, but that's not the only way that they decide who gets a grant. It also looks at geographic distribution across the state. They want to make sure that, when I say they, it's the Parks and Recreation Authority. It's a statewide board, and they meet once a year to decide on projects to fund. Well, so they look at geographic distribution all the way across the state. They don't want to fund 20 projects in a 2-county area. So even if you have a very strong project, it might be put on the back burner for that reason. Or maybe, the other things they look at are land availability. If there's an acquisition project and it needs to be done right now, that might receive more priority. And they also look at local buy-in. I think that's really one of the biggest pieces of the Part F application is, and I'll give a quick example. Valdez has received 3 Part F grants since I've started working on recreation, so in the last 5 years. And I think one of the things that really set them apart is their friends group. They have organized Friends of the Valdez Rec group. They've done really effective fundraising. They've got a lot of volunteers working in their parks, and it just really effectively demonstrates that local people actually want this. So local buy-in can be donations, monetary donations, or it can be just showing up throughout the planning process and giving your input and kind of helping guide us in the right direction, guide guide you, the ultimate decision makers, in the right direction. With that, I think I will, do y'all have questions? I know I just ran through that.
Let's do this. When would council want to see a project started? Besides yesterday? Like when would next year be a good timeline? If you have to do the grant process?
Did you apply?
How soon can you apply for it?
So we just had our call for projects for this year. So the next call for projects will probably be beginning of May 2021. And then typically somewhere around August or September, the authority will meet and decide who gets funded. So you would probably be looking at starting your project somewhere around maybe October.
And how quickly would we have to? No, that's not all. How quickly at that point, what is the typical timeline once, assuming you're accepted?
It's usually a 2-year project period from the time you sign the grant contract, which may be in October. That's when you're eligible to start spending funds on the project. So it's typically a 2-year turnaround. We can request extensions, but I've never heard of a project dragging out longer than, I think, 3.5 years was one. Does that answer your question?
So what you're saying is if we started the project October of 2021, if we were to get free to spend the funds, so theoretically the park could be completed if all the projects are fitting by October 2023.
Is there a possibility to finish before that?
Absolutely. As soon as you're funded, as soon as you have that signed grant application, you're spending funds. So the key to really make the project move quickly, if and when you get funded, is to do all the legwork on the front end. And that's one reason why I really hammer in the planning thing. Go ahead.
That's what I was gonna ask you, the 6 months you're talking about for the surveys and stuff like that, do we need to start that before May? Or do you start that in May too?
I would start that as soon as possible to get your
So we
background.
need to have that done first.
Mhm.
So when you're talking about public input, you're talking about, there's various ways to do it. So surveys, which we have done one survey, town hall meetings, internet polls, what other forms of input would satisfy what you're looking for in that planning stage?
You know, Part F does not specifically lay out what they want you to do. The idea is just that you make it as meaningful as possible. Surveys are recommended. Public meetings, just stakeholder meetings where everybody sits together and discusses parts. Those are common, but I mean, we'll probably have to think outside the box now that we're in the times of COVID. I don't see a whole lot of public meetings being attended, but maybe. It can be any number of things, but I would say the idea is to make it meaningful, to try and reach the people who may not be as outspoken, who might not want to come to a public meeting and tell their opinion, but still have an opinion.
Since this COVID thing's going on, I'm just asking, say we talking to the public, could they write up a paper and turn it in, would that be official as public comment? I mean, I don't know.
If we have like a uniform process, maybe.
Yeah, we could look at, and we would have to look at that process. Typically what I do for a public, for a parks plan for a city, a town of this size would be to do a survey, which we distribute paper survey and online. And then I hold a series of public meetings that usually one sometime during the day and one in the evening, just so that people with different availabilities can make it. And then at the end of the process, the plan is presented to, well, there's actually potential also to form some sort of a special committee to do periodic review. That's not a necessity. Ultimately, the final plan would be presented to the town council at a public meeting for adoption or revision if that's recommended.
So when you're talking about this planning process, are you talking about actually creating a formal recreation master plan, or is that a separate, complete separate entity on what we would need to do even prior to this? Because we've talked about and budgeted, if I'm not mistaken, at least for 2 years now, to do one in anticipation of eventually applying for a part F grant, which we hadn't done. So I just want to draw a clear distinction whether we're talking about in this planning process of actually doing a recreation master plan, if that's going to be necessary to make us competitive, and is the planning part of this project you're talking about, is that part of the recreation master plan, or is that separate?
Yes. The Parks and Recreation Trust Fund, you do get, I'll say you get points for doing certain things. And so you get points for having a master plan, and you get points for having a site-specific plan. So that's what I'm talking about, is creating those plans. And actually, we would do it 2 in 1. We would do a town-wide Parks and Recreation plan, but then also kind of zoom in on the new park property and put all of that in one document. And then that would be the document that is turned in with the Part F application. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
It both makes us more competitive, and it allows us to look at other issues in town. I think that's the dual benefit, right? Tell me this, how quickly has someone finished the Part F process once they've been awarded?
His Mountain. I was gonna say, it was His Mountain. What was that, about that was less than a year.
9 months, something like that. Okay.
It was a quick turnaround. The key, and when one takeaway from past plans, past projects that I've done, is to have as accurate a cost estimates on the front end as possible. And I would go as far as, that is part of the planning process. I'll give you ballpark numbers, the master planning process, I'll say. But I would suggest, hiring an engineer or an engineering firm or somebody to really give you, especially if you have any structural work that needs to be done, to really give you solid numbers. Because once you turn in an application, Part F is, even if your project comes in twice the cost of what you thought it would, Part F is not going to give you more than what they said they would give you. You would be responsible for making up the difference.
So let's talk some more about scoring. What do we need to know to make our project competitive?
Essentially, you've got to do public input in as many forms as you can stand. And, that includes presenting the project. Well, that includes the master plan and the process within that. That includes the site-specific plan in that process. It includes any surveys.
That's a good point. I'll interrupt you right there. So we have done around the surveys, but me and you talked, and I think we would have to do another round. Like, that round didn't necessarily qualify for what Part F wants to see.
I think it's still useful, but I think I would do another round just to be broad. Make sure that we're not feeding people ideas, but asking them broadly, what do you see that we need? What do you see that needs improvement? I don't remember what question I was answering. I'm sorry. Did I get it?
I was just asking, what would we need to look at to make our application competitive? So as far as I understand, public input helps, I understand plans help. I know there's been some talk previously about certain amenities count, some don't. Can you break that part of it down for us?
I'll break it down as much as I can without getting too much in the weeds.
Okay.
Essentially, there are 3 different categories of park amenities that you can have. One would be something brand new, something that you don't have on site, a swing set maybe. One would be rehabilitation or improvement of an existing amenity. So maybe you have a walking track, but it needs resurfacing. That would be that rehab category. And then the final is just a like existing, so say you already have a swing set in the park and you wanna add another swing set. That counts as an amenity like existing. So you maximize points by doing things in each of those categories. And since this wasn't a park site before, we have to get creative with that. But the idea is to vary the amenities so that you're not just providing one really big thing, but you're providing a number of different opportunities for different types of people and interest groups. Let me see, I'll go to the scoring system and just tell you.
And while you're looking at that, I just want to touch on the rehab part of that. So since we are talking about the site, which I'm sure you are familiar with. So the tower, would that qualify if we do anything with the tower? Would that qualify under the rehab category?
It depends. It depends if we can, what the end goal of that work on the tower would be. Would that be to be a public amenity? Would you include, restrooms within the structure or an overlook? The whole bird watching overlook? I'm not sure. It depends how you spin it, really.
I think we look at it more or less like just a monument, like a
Just a
statue,
historical.
nobody get in and out of that stuff.
And that
Clean
stuff
it up.
is sometimes included in CARDAC projects. It doesn't count as an amenity. It could be included within the budget though. So if you were gonna spend money on that, I would include it within the budget and wait, don't spend money until if and when you get a grant.
So if we have a concession stand at the ball field that is in that general facility, that is an existing structure, but we want to rehab it and maybe add on to it or do something because it's a concession stand, would that qualify as rehab as well as an amenity? If we added restrooms or did anything extra to it?
The concession stand would be considered a support facility for ball fields. So you could almost make the case that it's a rehabilitation of the ball field complex. It's a little sticky.
Okay, I mean, yes, it does currently exist as, next to the ball field, but if we were to rehab it to use it for multiple uses, for town functions, things like that, to add bathrooms to it or anything like that, if we were to use that more in town, but also with the ball field, I guess I'm just trying to get clarification on that.
Unless there was some element of recreation within the building itself, and I'm trying to think of an example, but maybe you have a climbing wall on one side of it, then that would be considered an amenity. I'm not saying that's a good idea, I know, but no, it could be funded, it could be included within a budget for a CARDAC grant, but it would probably not benefit the project in the scoring system.
Would a stage and an amphitheater, would that,
Yes, those count.
okay, and a splash pad?
That absolutely counts.
How many amenities would we be looking for as a minimum for the grant?
It really is dependent on the site and what makes sense there, because, the who gets funded, like I said, doesn't come down entirely to the scoring system. There's an element of the narrative to it too, and fundamentally, there's only so much room on the site. I would shoot for 4 or 5, and I'll say some of those can be small. You could do, set up cornhole or horseshoe. The one thing is it would need to be a permanent installation. But you could set up a permanent cornhole. A lot of places do that. It's just another activity without spending a whole lot more money.
Would like the pavilion count?
Yes, a picnic shelter or pavilion. You could do swings like for seating. I know that's a little out there, but if you have seating around the amphitheater anyway, you could do swings. That's a bad idea. I actually have a list here, and it's within the Parks and Recreation Trust Fund application. But it lays out some examples of what a recreational facility is for the purpose of the scoring system. And I'll just run through real quick. It's amphitheaters, court games, including like cornhole or volleyball, picnic facilities, camp facilities, trails, splash pads, sports facilities, so courts or fields. And then also large designated open areas with benches, walkways, stuff like that. So if you had a courtyard area, especially if we did some nice landscaping or something to bring it together, that could count as a gathering space. Support facilities are not recreational facilities. That's all bolded.
What, I'm sorry, what was that?
Support facilities.
Oh,
So that's the stuff like parking lots and roads and lighting and drinking fountains. And I think that your question about the concession stand is somewhat of a gray area, but the way this reads is that it would not count toward the scoring.
If you had a courtyard that had any type of memorial within it, whether it's plaques or things like that, you think that would work?
Yeah, I do.
Aaron, if we were to start this process, when would you recommend starting it? And what would be, let's say, first actions?
I would start it as soon as possible, which is as good as the answer yesterday. I mean, I would try to make a decision reasonably as quickly as you can and start by September at the latest. It gets tough to try and, because you want to do, the first step is recon, is looking at what we have, looking at what would feasibly fit within the spaces that we have, and formulating a survey that's going to be meaningful, and formulating our public input process, which is going to be a little different this time than it has been in the past. So those would be, I mean, I would meet with town staff if we decide to go with a committee to guide the process. I would highly recommend that you have town staff on it, but you could also include citizens, council members. I would just be sure to be representative if we go that route.
Out of curiosity, how many members would you think for a committee?
Maybe around 5, 10. I mean, the more members you have, it's great. It gets hard to have a focused conversation though. So we do have public input meetings that are aimed at, casting a wide net and getting as much information as possible. But for the purpose of the committee, I would say a little bit smaller is probably better.
5 to 7,
Yeah.
Odd number.
Yeah, we love odd numbers.
Numbers are members.
When you
One
say,
thing we try to clear about this, unless rules have changed, whatever we spend pre-award is not eligible for reimbursement.
Correct.
So if you do engineering, you do architect, you do design, whatever, to prepare things, you're doing that with the hope that you'll get a grant, but you won't be reimbursed. It won't count towards your 50/50.
Correct. Anything that you spend before signing the grant agreement is not gonna count towards your 50/50
It's
match.
totally town money without reimbursement.
For example, the recreation plan, the master plan, that would not,
Correct.
when you say public input, can you define public input? Is that just taxpayers? Is it community?
Typically, typically I just cast the net wide and say, if you have an opinion, we want to hear it. Because, you know, you're gonna have tourists coming into town. Ideally, you want people from other parts of Burke County to come into town and use your park and go to your restaurants. So I like to cast the net wide and try to hear from everybody. But, like on the survey, I would probably put a question that says, are you a town resident? Yes or no? Because I think there's a little more weight that a town resident would hold than being the taxpayers and being the ones, and I won't say necessarily only property owners in town. I'll say if you live in the town of Hildebrand, I think that's a significant data point that we need to know. So yes, public input would be aimed at anyone who has an opinion, but we would do work to separate out the in-town opinions versus the outsiders, I guess.
Any other questions from council? What about from Derek or Ben?
No, I'm fine, thank you. This is Ben.
Anything from Hunter?
I think Derek got,
Disconnected, okay.
Yeah, are we taking consideration that we've already done a survey?
Yes, and I do think that we would use the data, and I actually haven't seen that survey or the results of it yet, so I can only speak broadly. But we would take the results of that survey and use them in the consideration and in the creation of the recommendations. But I would want to do another survey just to make sure that we're checking all the boxes in terms of Part F and that we're again casting the net wide.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody got anything else?
Is there any information council would like to get, in terms of hard copies regarding Part F?
I mean, I would love to see an application, so if you're able to email it to us, I think that would be great.
How about the points? I'd like to have a copy, how many points you give this now.
And Aaron, that was a good point last time too, is I know we do not get, because Hildebrands gotten a Part F grant, we do not get the 20 first time points. But from my understanding, most of the communities who have gotten a Part F grant or who would get a Part F grant have already done so. So the vast majority of applicants no longer get those 20 points. Is that fair?
Right, I mean, those 20, actually, if you haven't gotten a public park before, you check this box and we'll give you money. But I've only worked with one local government in my 5 years here, with one local government, and that was Cakes Mountain, that was building their first park and it got those points. And now they're no longer eligible for those points on future applications. So, I mean, no, I've seen it so without those points.
We're doing good on time.
What sequential steps should the town do in timeline in order to prepare to give us the best possibility of getting points? Town goes that direction.
I would say execute a contract to start a master planning process for the parks. And Logan and I have spoken a little bit about that, but we have combined within one plan, the master or wide plan for parks, which would be town-wide and include sidewalks and the existing park. And then typically, maybe as an appendix, do the site-specific plan. So that's what I said is typically, creating those plans is typically about a 6-month process. We can shorten it up a little bit. And then once that plan is adopted, there can be a little bit of overlap, but really I like to get that plan adopted first so that we know that that is, you know, the direction that we want to go. All of our public input is tied up there in one place, and we've got all the information before us, and the town council has spoken and said that they are in support of this general vision. So I like to get to that point before we start broadcasting, hey, this is what we're trying to do, and do you support it or not? Because you've got to have the budget numbers, you've got to know what exactly you are proposing, and kind of put that vision out there. So I would start with contracting for a master plan, and then we would start working on after that. At least it's fleshed out, even if it's in draft form, then start working toward holding your part of specific meetings. There's another couple administrative things if you wanted. I'm not sure if you have a CIP for Parks, Recreation, or if you have an overall CIP that maybe includes Parks and Recreation, but you can get additional points if you do that. And that's something that can be created with relative ease if we're looking specifically at parks. And other administrative stuff, really, you want to have a few months before the application to hold all your meetings and stuff, because it gets difficult to minutes approved in time and make sure that you get the timelines of it all to line up.
And I believe if we submit it a month early, we get the opportunity for feedback.
Yeah, so that would probably, that would put us at a goal of April 1st to have our part of project put together, an application put together. April 1st, 2021.
About 9 months-ish.
So Logan, how quickly to execute a contract to start the planning process, that would require a vote from the council, correct?
Are those contracts things that the cog already has written up that?
Yeah, I have a
Simple
template. Yeah, I could prepare one for you as quickly as you need it.
So we could probably have it within a week or two?
Yeah, when's your next meeting?
29th, but we would need it, we could technically have it after the 27th, I'm sorry. I think it's July 27th. So if we could have it by the 21st, that would be preferred, but if not, we could add it that night.
I can get it to you before then.
Okay.
No one else has anything. Said we're gonna keep it about an hour. We've done that. Does anybody have anything else?
Last thing, general cost estimate for one of these plans. Do you have any idea how much we're looking at?
We'll need to talk a little more about how we're gonna go about the public input, but I would say ballpark 15,000 to do. That's both of the plans that we talked about. Both of
That
the
includes survey and all that.
Yes.
You have to have that done, like the master plan, right?
right, that is a part of the master plan, so that would be all of the public input, master plan, and site-specific plan delivered with pretty little maps in them.
Since we're talking money, that made me think of another question. So I know in the information that Logan presented, he said the average award grant was about $250,000. So is there a limit to what part it covers, and is it more advantageous to or have a better chance of success in getting funded if you have a lesser cost project or a greater cost project?
It's not necessarily the case that a lower cost project is more likely to be, well, it is more likely to be funded. You've got to have pretty strong justification for asking for the cap award. They cap out their awards at $500,000, so that would be $1 million project. They don't often give out $500,000 though. You have to have very strong justification for it. I usually recommend, you get solid cost estimates, you make sure that you're gonna cover your actual expenses, but don't ask for a whole lot more than that, because if they don't have enough money, they don't do partial awards. So if they have $240,000 left and you ask for $250, they're not gonna fund your project, they're gonna go look for something smaller. So, yeah, I would say, that 250, somewhere around there is kind of a sweet spot. If you need to go higher, if there's solid justification for it, then that's acceptable,
So 250 would generate a $500,000 project.
correct?
All right. Everybody ready to adjourn?
Is that the wish of council, is to have a contract ready by the next meeting?
You need to ask you, will you make a motion or something on that? I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion. Get the man started.
Okay.
Cole, yes.
Mike, yes.
Gary, yes.
Ben?
Ben, yes.
We don't have Derek.
No, Derek.
Are there providers that we can get a list of that are good at drawing up these kind of plans or directing us these kind of directions and so forth? Y'all have people to explore with on a regular basis.
Yeah, I would recommend some.
We'll have to have somebody there in mind between now and Monday week. I'm saying it sounds like a long time. Government for 9 months is not.
Oh, I know.
I make a motion to adjourn.
This might be in last.
So we keep it an hour, if we get under 59 minutes, my wife will be happy. Cole, yes.
Mike, yes. Gary, yes.
Ben, yes.
Sorry, man.
Now I
No
have
problem.
I have to change my minute template. I have been on there.
Good job, guys. Good information. Good job. Good job.
Alice, I can't stop without